It's really fun looking out in the audience in these retreats. So many people look like they're in samadhi, and then there are people with some intense, like, emotional stuff on their face they're going through, and there's people with these, like, huge shit-eating grins on their face. Just so funny. That blissed out grin, fun. So we're, I guess, approaching almost the halfway point-ish, give or take, I think. Is it Wednesday or Tuesday? It's Wednesday. Oh, yeah. Jeez. Yeah. Wow. Um, so the good thing about that is for people who are new to retreat, this is their first one. They weren't sure if they could handle all that meditation and round after round and so forth. Now you know you can. May not have been easy, but you've made it this far. Usually sometime in the second or third day, maybe fourth day, often the retreat will really shift. It did for me in my early retreats. The first few days, whatever, seemed pretty intense, kind of uncomfortable and restless and a lot of thoughts, all that. At some point, it seems to kind of turn the corner, though, where you're in this different space, maybe. It's kind of the retreat space where things can become much more fluid. They shift more rapidly. Things come and go more effortlessly. Insights are more clear and kind of just readily available. And still very intense things can come up, and they can come up like quickly, kind of out of the blue. They can also move through quickly. Yeah, so there's not any specific advice for this other than to say you've done the work to cultivate this space. We all have. And now we can really settle into it and let it show us what it has to offer. And the offering is through your immediate direct experience, deepening this presence, which is automatic at this point. Really, you're only called to not distract yourself. Let the retreat do what it does. Let everything be as it is. Let the insights appear as they appear. Don't get in its way any more than will happen a bit by habit. Paul Ederman has a nice way of saying it. It's like when you're going in for surgery, you only have two jobs: don't move and don't try to be the surgeon. Now, I talked about the experience early on in retreat of like a lot of thoughts and then kind of intense emotions and stuff that kind of come up. Um, and that is mm, sort of the first layer of the collected or habituated uh, identity structure, I suppose, that this starts to get peeled away at retreat. And underneath that, often what is recognized or felt or experienced in retreat is, and there can still be thoughts and the things that I talked about, but underneath that is this sense often of kind of being disoriented in a certain way, like almost like you're not sure uh, who you are, maybe in a certain way. Not sure how to orient yourself. Kind of feels a little more vulnerable. Um, Almost like you're trying to walk on ground that's not completely solid or something. I'm trying to describe a sort of energetic experience, but I'm trying to describe it to normalize it. That it's pretty typical at this point in retreat where it sort of feels like yeah, I don't really know. Maybe I don't even know why I came here. Not sure what I'm trying to get out of this. Uh, Not sure what spirituality is about. Uh, Not really sure what I should even be doing, maybe. And even the big questions like life, what is this all about? I'm not even so sure I know what that's about anymore. I thought I did, right? So all of these are just the sort of interpretive versions of the disorientation I'm talking about. Um, and this kind of disorientation is not bad. It's just what happens here. It's really what it really is. A simpler way of saying it, or a simple model for it would be that what it is um, reorientation, or a kind of rewiring in a way, reorganization energetically. That's probably the best way to say it, is reorganization. So there's a reorganization that's going on energetically, and you're not doing that at all. It's not like you're choosing that in any specific way. That you're certainly not in control of it. You're not directing it. And by now you probably know that, or you feel that instinctually. But it is happening. So so that's a good thing. That's what we come here for. That reorganization, that energetic reorganization, really um, is kind of the point of retreat, and it's really the point of intense practice or deep inquiry. Now, you can feel this outside of retreat, but it's not super typical. It may be somebody who has a very aggressive meditation practice on a daily basis, or does a lot of inquiry. But when it's most prominent, would be those moments when the conditions line up for a significant shift in identity to occur. And right as that's sort of approaching, you often feel exactly this kind of, you know, groundlessness or disorientation, or you feel like something's being reorganized, but you're not consciously clear on what it is. Those are the circumstances that you may find that this experience outside of retreat. But in retreat, it's reasonably predictable that once we really sit for a while, calm the mind, calm the body, really start to investigate or confront identity, because what else is there to look at except for that inward experience? It's pretty typical that we start to notice that. So this reorganization, uh, yeah, it's not something that you necessarily will understand. I I want to say, I want to talk about it in terms of alignment. You may not feel like or understand that it's in alignment with your mental version of yourself, what you take yourself to be, because it may not be. In fact, if you're really going for it, you're really trying to sort of penetrate that identity barrier, then it's not in alignment with what you take yourself to be, because it's not concerned with what you take yourself to be. Uh, it is more in alignment with the emotion body, right? Because the emotion body is, in one sense, um, the way station between, I could say, your true undifferentiated nature and the energetics of the body, let's say. And so we start to do a lot of work in that emotion spectrum, and that is a place where we can have some awareness of what's actually happening, how things are shifting, what kind of traumas are coming to the surface, what's being released. Like you'll have some direct knowledge of that, and that's a very important part of retreat. It's a very important part of transformative work and spiritual work and shadow work. But underneath all of that, the alignment is clear, and that is the alignment with prajna wisdom, transcendent wisdom, living truth, the Dharma, however you want to say it. And as I mentioned at the beginning of retreat, that's what brought us here in the first place. That alignment, that instinct is what brought us here. So what is doing the reorganization or reorganizing, which is not only an individual thing, it's a collective energetic, uh, is totally in alignment with your deepest truth. And what we're doing in retreat is, little by little, we are reorganizing our lives to our deepest truth. That can look many different ways. Even after deep realization insights, people move differently through the world. Then not everybody becomes a spiritual teacher. Not everybody becomes a renunciate. It's not like that. So it can still look very differentiated in the relative, but in the energetic spectrum of things, the alignment is clear. And that's what realization is about. It's about clarifying that deepest alignment, which will have effects on all the other layers of self. And even the cognitive layer, even the layer of relative understanding and logic and thoughts and so forth, although that tends to come later. For a long time, that just gets mixed up like in a blender almost. When it comes to the spiritual process, we just fight ourselves through the mental process. But in the end, when things really settle out, even the mind will become your friend. So all I'm really saying with all of that is, if you notice this sense of disorientation, uh, reorganization energetically, that's the point. Just keep showing up, touching what needs to be touched. As I mentioned in the guided meditation this morning, if you feel oriented this way today, orienting toward that metta practice, that heart-based loving kindness, compassion practice, feeling the outflow of love, compassion through the heart channel. If you have access to it, see what it does, see where it goes, see where that love finds itself out here, in here, anywhere in the body, anywhere in the emotion body, toward anyone that you see and anyone you don't see, and toward all that breathes and does not breathe. That's a good practice. In terms of metta, loving kindness, I do feel that ultimately what this is about, what this whole thing is about, really does come back down to compassion. And I'll quote my teacher. Probably everybody in here has heard me say this, maybe some people haven't. And I think I put it in my book, but my teacher had said this thing. He said it in different ways, but I remember very specifically one time he said that ultimately realization, enlightenment is about living out of the innermost promptings of your tender and loving heart, but without insight, without awakening, without realization, without direct insight. You will think you're doing that, but you'll be living out of the outermost promptings of your deluded ego. And we can all relate to that in various ways. And we can look out into the world and see very large scale versions of that. People who probably really think they're doing a good thing, but really seem to be causing a lot of harm, right? Now we can shake our fist at the outside world, or we can look at our inside world and see, well, where am I doing that? Maybe not on that scale, but where am I doing that? And that's part of this work. Part of this work is shadow, to see what we're not seeing, to be willing to see what we're not seeing, looking at our motivations, looking at our repressed emotions, looking at areas we haven't looked at. And this metta practice is a really, really good way to approach it, because we approach it then with acceptance. You know, the best way I've seen to approach the darkest parts of us, the most repressed, traumatized, forgotten, suppressed, even hated parts of ourself, the best way to approach them is through loving kindness, which isn't necessarily a kind of romantic love or it's not even, I would even say like a necessarily bound by being a human form of love. It's a love that is truly unconditional. So it doesn't make conditions on what it touches. So it's fully accepting, doesn't recoil, doesn't turn away, doesn't run away. It's rather courageous in a sense, because everything it touches, it finds, and this is important, more of itself. It finds not two. This is the deeper sort of heart-based version of non-dual. Sometimes non-duality is talked about in a almost pretty dry way, actually, in a very transcendent, almost like erroneously transcendent way, equated with being non-human or something. But this is if non-dual realization matures, then it will start to look like this. It'll start to look like anything that's touched with this compassion, with this love. There's a recognition of self, a recognition of already what I am. So there's not a recoil from suffering. On the personal level or in the personal dimension, the difference is an important one between being realized, having the deep insights, including non-dual insight, and still making a very significant distinction between that and those who are still suffering and those who are still seeking. Like seekers are a subspecies of humans or something, right? Spiritual seekers. You'll hear this kind of talk online sometimes. There's a difference between that and the realization clarifying and the non-dual insight clarifying in the sort of metasphere to the way of moving through the world where even suffering is recognized as not other. So it's tricky to talk about this, but in a sense, the realization has to take you back into suffering. Because if your brother or sister is suffering, then how can you say you're not? How can you say that's apart from you? You know, you can't stand apart as the enlightened one anymore. There are some very nice lines in the Shinchen Ming and other liturgy that point to this. Abiding neither in the state of enlightenment nor where no enlightenment exists. Very important. Non-abiding anywhere. This is metta, or loving kindness, as it flows forth from the deep insights. No, non-duality, anatta. And that work really begins with anatta, or with the realization of not self. Begins in earnest. Certainly it can begin before that. But beyond that, you realize that's the only game in town. Adyashanti has a nice way of saying it, that when you, I think he says kind of at some point, there's nothing else that makes sense anymore than to be a benevolent presence in the world, right? And I think that's totally true. And yet you won't pride yourself on that either. You won't take pride in that. If you're taking pride in that, then there's probably more waking up to do. But you'll see that that's just how it goes. Well, what else are you going to spend all your energy doing, right? And part of that is continuing to do shadow work as it comes up. If there's anything, in yourself that is still moving in a selfish way, in an unnecessarily selfish way, you're still going to eat, and you're still going to self-protect, and so forth, just not in a pathological way or a way based on delusion or based on false identity structures. And you'll know the difference. So that work still continues. It just gets subtler and subtler. So part of it is that, and that, as I described this morning, is that heart opening can flow inward and should flow inward to all aspects of our own personal experience, all aspects of our emotional experience, all aspects of our history, all of that. And it should also flow outward, of course, toward those around us and towards the animals around us and the environment, and appreciation for mere existence. And there has to be a balance there as well. We can be too self-sacrificing, for sure. That's not the majority of people, but there are people who do really become truly too self-sacrificing. It becomes out of balance. And then that compassion is pouring outward, but it's notably maybe not pouring inward just to not see something or something's being missed, and vice versa. I think more commonly, the compassion is more like self-interest, and we're not recognizing how much love actually can flow outward and how satisfying of a way to live that actually is. Nisargadatta has a beautiful quote. In my world, love is the only law. I don't ask for it, I give it. This is really powerful. This is really, really powerful. It's not saying that self love is unnecessary. It's really a correction for the usual ways that we uh, think about and perceive the world and ourselves. We tend to think in a self centered way. Thoughts tend to be very self centered. So when we realize, oh, okay, there's the antidote for that is actually love, is compassion, is an outward pouring of noticing, attention, presence, and even offering real uh, relief where that's possible and relevant. And it's important to be in alignment with this. Is kind of what I'm getting at. To check in with yourself and see, like, am I expending too much energy outward? Am I expending too much energy inward? And find a balance there. And being on retreat and doing deep work, including deep shadow work, really helps us to clarify this balance. The balance is natural, and we'll know it when we're in balance. And usually we know it when we're out of balance. But what can be obscured is the obstructions that get us out of balance. They're obscured often through just being very busy, distracted, thought, largely just through being so busy. It's amazing how much distraction we have in our lives. And it's just gotten more and more, I think, over years and years, decades, centuries. We've just become more and more distracted in our heads and so forth. Or at least there are more ways to do that, readily available ways to do that. So retreat is just such a wonderful opportunity to go to that root and find anything that's obstructing our ability to go to that root at any time in any situation. And the obstructions will usually be somewhere along the emotion body, right? Um, and what's interesting is hopefully most of us are starting to recognize this, but even when we're in retreat and we're in silence, it's not like we feel cut off from other people. We may start to feel like that we're actually interacting with everyone, but in a very different language, a language of movement, a language of energetics. And in my experience, at that level of, let's call it communication, that's where the love flows most easily. Even when I'm interacting with people through language and verbally, exchanging whatever, still, I think that my sense of the flow of love is actually much more like what I feel in retreats. It's more instinctual. It's more sort of movement based. It's more feeling based and energetic. So we're actually practicing that. We're practicing that balancing here, because what we realize is we can keep our attention inside. We can keep our attention in our own sensations, right? Or just in the sounds of the environment and the movements and shapes and forms and colors, all of it, uh, which could be called inner work in a sense, contemplative work. Certainly, it's silent work, and yet we're not cut off. We don't feel, at least hopefully most of us don't feel super cut off from everyone around us. We're rather aware of the environment we're in. We're aware as we move through the room and outside and walk past people. So we're not cut off. We're certainly interacting at energetic levels. And because there's not that extra layer of uh, of just verbal language, which can be supportive, can be helpful at times, but it can also be very distorting And I would say maybe the majority of it is somewhat distorting, in the sense that a lot of languages used, a lot of times we use language to convey identity. Like, here's who I am, here's who I think you are, and going into complicity to keep those illusions upheld. This is often how we use identity when we interact on a day-to-day basis, or how we use language, excuse me. So when we put all of that aside, we are able to really address these fundamental communications, both with ourself, our own body, our own emotions, and also those around us. And without that potentially distorting layer of conversation, uh, exchange of information, and using language for rapport or rejection, without all of that in the way, I find that it's easier to strike that balance between inner work and outer work, love flowing inward and love flowing outward, until you start to see that they're actually not different. And this does correlate with deeper realization. It correlates with deeper insights. But you can live this way. Live with this really deep trust of yourself, but at the same time, a willingness to see what you've missed and continue to do that kind of work. At the same time, trusting also being a human being, trusting that generally being around other people is okay and safe. And at the same time, understanding boundaries, right? Understanding that, there are certain situations and certain people that we could be harmed by, and how to navigate that. I find that that kind of wisdom of both the sort of inner boundaries and the outer boundaries correlate. So the work we're doing here, even though commonly the mind, when we're feeling that disorientation, when we're feeling that sometimes even upheaval of retreat, the mind will say, how am I going to do this outside of here? Like, almost like scary that I'm going to have to go back to regular life. But that's just the mind trying to compare something that doesn't make sense, right? Like, the truth of it is the energetics and the conditions of this moment are particular to this moment, and they're relevant in this moment. And you can't really apply them to what's going to happen, well, even tomorrow, but certainly not a week from now. So yeah, the mind sometimes will scare us a little bit and say, oh, if I leave retreat in this state, like, I won't be able to function or something. But the truth is, it will take care of itself in time. You'll be okay. There may be a little bit of adjustment, but you'll be okay. And the reason I say that is, if we don't get too distracted by that, then we learn, oh, so I can trust going to the root. The old hippie that taught me transcendental meditation all those years ago, back in the early 90s, he quoted Maharishi Mahesh Yogi as saying, water the root and enjoy the fruit. So we're watering the root and we'll enjoy the fruit. We'll hear, but we'll also enjoy the fruit outside of retreat. But this is our opportunity to go to the root, to the kernel, to the seed. And that's what we're doing. How does that feel? Where is that? Where is that seed? Where is that kernel? Where's the root? It's down before identity. It's down before you learned who and what you are and who and what you have to be to make others happy, to please mom and dad, to remain internally congruent with who you decided you were before. Like, all of those identity structures may or may not have their place. They certainly have their place in many people's lives. You can live without them, actually, but even if they're still functioning, or functioning for a lot of your awake life, you still have the opportunity here to drop down below those, to drop down so deep into your experience that the structuring of how you perceive and how you think moment to moment is not necessary. I'll say that again, or maybe in a different way. You can drop deep enough right now during silent meditation, during guided meditation, during a talk, during sitting and eating. You can drop deep enough so that those identity structures that seem to structure your experience and all your perceptions about what's happening and what's not happening stop operating. And what that's like is something like undifferentiated experience. You'll have no way of making a map of this, but you'll know it in a certain way, I guess. When it's occurring, you'll recognize, oh, okay. I can't describe it. It's impossible. It has no description. It's beyond description. It moves in impossible ways, and yet it's so obvious and intimate and simple and available right here. So what I'm saying, the reason I'm saying this is to just help reattune some of us to that. That's where we're going. It's the only place you have to go. That's kind of the point of this whole thing is just below that experience of reorganizing, just below or fundamental to that experience of disorientation, which is a side effect of the reorganization at the energetic level. Just below that, there's a place of undifferentiated experience, which requires you not to make any boundaries, doesn't require you to know where you are, doesn't require you to hold some kind of space, doesn't require you to label anything, doesn't require you to have a backdrop, doesn't require you to have a foundation, doesn't require you to be anything or anyone specific, doesn't require you to understand anything. It has no specific structure, no specific location, but it's the essence of anything that can be perceived in the most basic way. And the I'd say you'll know it when you taste it, but it's like more fundamental even than knowing. What's more fundamental than knowing? You have to be a little bit apart to know something, don't you? To be able to go, that's that. And that means I'm me. So what's right before that? What's just fundamental to knowing? Knowing anything about experience or where you are in it or how you are in it? The experience of a body here may not even be locatable. The experience of time and space are essentially non existent here. What's closer than space? What's closer than time? What's free of close and far? What's free of time and timelessness? What's free of space and spacelessness? I hesitate to give descriptors, but it's like liquid reality. One thing it's not is fixated. It's not fixated in any way at all. The Heart Sutra has a line freed from delusive hindrance. It's just like that. And rid of the fear bred by it. Fear, all fear, primal fear, existential fear, is bred by the fear. I'm sorry. Is all fear including existential fear, is a result of trying to hold a space and there being and arising dependently with trying to hold a space, there's the fear of not being able to. So if you stop trying to hold if that space is not trying to be held anymore, space of existence, a space of being, if there's no attempt to hold that anymore, the fear doesn't arise. It could, it's not even bliss. It's better than bliss. And there is no self or other here, no large or small, inside or outside. You may find this in deep meditation, but it's essentially non-meditative. It doesn't come and go. It's not conditional. It's not conditional. So no conditions create it. No conditions can destroy it. So it doesn't come into being, and it can't actually be missed. Maybe it can be glossed over or something, but it's not missed. It's in your experience. And it is the sounds. And it is the sensation in your nose and your hands and your heart. But it's not just that. And it's not because it's bigger, because it's neither bigger nor smaller. Not bound by contraction or expansion, not bound by integration or disintegration, but accommodating all of the above. And sometimes the access point to what I'm pointing to is uh, through something in the shadow, something that felt blocked, felt uninhabitable, or even unfindable, but somehow many aspects of our experience was saying, "Don't go there, don't go there." And when you finally go there, uh, it's a sort of portal. And the reason it is a portal is because often a lot of restlessness, which creates the sense of self apart, time and space, etc., uh, emanates from the fundamental belief that this shouldn't be this way. And when we finally just go right into the center of it, however that happens, we realize there's no should or shouldn't. It just is. And the fight is over once we're there. And when the fight is over, often a lot of that restlessness just subsides. And the clarity is naturally revealed when we're not sort of fighting ourselves. So the advice is don't put the armor back on, or don't try to regroup into the sense of who you thought you were coming into retreat, whether it was a spiritual someone or a hurt someone or a confident someone, all kinds of someones out there, right? So the invitation is uh, from this knowing that it's not only safe, it's kind of the point to recognize this reorganization that comes with the side effect of disorientation sometimes, and what's below it, what's just fundamental to that. From that, we can actually abide there. There's a nice phrase, abide in non abiding. But now that we know that through direct experience, right, we can abide with this and we can just remind ourselves I don't have to put that armor back on. I don't have to put that identity back on, and see how it feels to move through this retreat without that clothing of identity, without having to constantly remind myself who I am. And the point of this is the enjoyment of that will be naturally revealed in the enjoyment of just being alive. What's it may seem like a lot to let go of, right? These ideas about who I am and where I'm going and where I came from and what my problems are and what my solutions are. It can seem like, wow, that's just a lot to let go of. But just try it and notice what you inherit. You inherit a very a profound depth of experience. It's mundane and simple and always here and through the five senses, but somehow overlooked. Notice how enjoyable it is to taste, unobstructed by trying to be someone. Notice how enjoyable it is to feel your feet on the ground, unobstructed by spending a bunch of mental energy trying to remind yourself of who you are and what's important and what's not important. Notice the natural enjoyment of the trees, the scenery of the sky and the trees and the snow when you're not trying to solve a problem, not trying to figure it out, not trying to be spiritual. So this is kind of a laboratory in a way. See what's possible moment to moment.